Bonsoir tout le monde. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sasha Suda, and I'm the Director and CEO of the National Gallery of Canada. Je m'appelle Sasha Suda et je suis la Directrice Générale du Musée des Beaux-Arts du Canada. Tonight I'm zooming in from the National Gallery here in Ottawa on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, who have been the caretakers of this land for millennia. Je suis ravie d'avoir l'opportunité de dire quelques mots à l'occasion de la série de conférences des artistes invités de la Fondation Stonecroft de cette année. This important annual event happens thanks to a long and productive collaboration between the Stonecroft Foundation, the National Gallery of Canada, and the University of Ottawa. Je tiens à remercier les deux partenaires du musée pour tout ce qu'ils font pour contribuer à la réalisation de ce projet. The 2020 edition is the 6th lecture in this ongoing series. And to everyone watching, thank you for joining us in Zoom space this year. I know there's competition for your time, and we don't take for granted that you've chosen to join us. I'm pretty sure I know why you've come though, and it's because this year we welcome Vancouver-based Ken Lum as our guest artist. The National Gallery of Canada has many of Ken's work in its collection, some of which I'm sure he will talk about this evening. Best known for his unsettling photo text diptychs or portrait logos, Lum has always poked at festering divisions in Canadian society. He shines a light on the experience of immigrants, tension between police and Indigenous peoples, and divisions of race and class. He often uses humor, which makes us all, as viewers, think long and hard about why we're laughing. The pandemic has heightened those divisions, and I'm excited to hear Ken speak about how his art has been impacted by the crisis that surrounds us all, and really that consumes us all. Ken is known for his conceptual and representational art in various media, including painting, sculpture, and photography. For the past 30 years, he has shown his work in major exhibitions all over the world. Ken Lum is a revered artist in Canada and internationally, and we're lucky to have him with us tonight. You can see Ken's work at the National Gallery of Canada and encourage you to come and visit us soon and in person. We're open Thursday through Sunday, and more than 41,000 people have come to see us since we reopened in July. Before we hear from Ken, you'll hear welcome remarks from Elder Claudette Commanda of Kitgin-Zibi, Dean Kevin Key of the University of Ottawa, and lastly, Ginny Yu of the University of Ottawa to introduce Ken Lum. Thank you again to Ken, Josée, and to you, the audience, and everyone at the Stonecroft Foundation, at the National Gallery of Canada, and at the University of Ottawa for making this event possible. Bonsoir et merci.
Greetings, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Bienvenue ici à la territoire ancestral de mes peuples algonquins. I am always honored and always proud to bring welcome words on behalf of the Algonquin Nation, to greet brothers and sisters from everywhere. I welcome you to this beautiful homeland of the Algonquin people, the homeland that has been entrusted since time immemorial by my ancestors, and the homeland which we must ensure will be here forevermore for our children. I bring you greetings and I say welcome. I bring you greetings and I say I hope that everyone is doing well during these hard times that we are all experiencing due to COVID-19 pandemic. It is with love, with kindness and friendship that I welcome you. I'm very honored to give these welcoming words for the 6th annual Stonecroft Lecture, and to welcome one of Canada's leading international artists, Ken Lum. So on behalf of the Algonquin Nation, again I say to you, welcome, brothers and sisters. Welcome to this beautiful land of the Algonquin people. Bienvenue tout le monde ici, à la territoire ancestral de les peuples algonquins. Please take good care, be well, be safe, and remember, An act of kindness is such a blessing, in the same way that art is such healing, and we all need to heal. We all need to stand together and praise one another and hold one another in good thought, hold one another in good heart, hold one another in good prayer. Take good care. I love you all. Kizagian, Miigwech. Thank you.
Bonsoir, Madame Souda, Mr. Lum, Madame Commanda, chers étudiantes et étudiants, chers collègues et chers amis. Before we begin, I would like to pay respect to the Algonquin people who are the traditional guardians of this land. We acknowledge their long-standing relationship with this territory which remains unceded. We pay respect to all Indigenous people in this region, from all nations across Canada who call Ottawa home. Nous reconnaissons les gardiens des savoirs traditionnels, jeunes et âgés. Nous honorons aussi leurs courageux dirigeants d'hier, d'aujourd'hui et de demain. I'm delighted to welcome you to this event. Tonight you will have the pleasure to participate in the 6th annual Stonecroft Visiting Artist Lecture Series, offered by the distinguished artist, Mr. Ken Lum. Je tiens à remercier sincèrement et chaleureusement la Fondation Stonecroft pour les Arts, the Stonecroft Foundation for the Arts, pour sa générosité et son rôle primordial dans la promotion des arts et les artistes canadiens de grande envergure. Thank you for your unwavering support and for the vital role that you play in promoting the arts in Canada. The Faculty of Arts and the University of Ottawa are proud to count you as our friends and partners. I also want to offer our warmest welcome and thanks to Ken Lum, one of Canada's leading international artists. Votre présence ici ce soir nous honore au plus haut point et c'est avec enthousiasme que nous attendons votre présentation et la discussion qui suivra. It's an honor to welcome you tonight and to have the privilege to hear you speak. Thank you. Merci également au Musée des Beaux-Arts du Canada pour sa précieuse collaboration et tout particulièrement à Madame Sacha Souda, la directrice générale, pour son accueil sur cette plateforme numérique ainsi que pour son appui et son engagement. We feel privileged to have the opportunity to collaborate with you and your institution. Un grand merci également à l'équipe du département d'art visuel à l'Université d'Ottawa et son directeur Jacob Judabik et la professeure Ginny Yu pour son travail remarquable dans l'organisation de cet événement. Et finalement, merci aux membres, merci vous, communauté universitaire, de votre présence ce soir. I wish you a wonderful evening, and I now ask Professor Yu to introduce tonight's distinguished guest and speaker.
Merci, Doyen Kevinki, et bienvenue à toutes et tous à la 6e série de conférences d'artistes de la Fondation Stonecroft. I would like to thank Elder Claudette Commanda for welcoming us to this unceded and unsurrendered territory of Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. I feel always grateful to be able to live and work here. Au département d'art visuel de l'Université d'Ottawa, nous sommes très fiers de notre programme de maîtrise en art visuel. Les étudiants qui sont inscrits à la maîtrise sont invités à adopter une approche multidisciplinaire qui comprend une diversité de pratiques artistiques, de la photographie aux arts médiatiques, en passant par la performance, la sculpture, la peinture, le dessin, la vidéo et l'installation. During their 2-year training at the department, our students take an in-depth look at practices and theories informing contemporary art and image culture in both official languages. Our MFA program is small and selective. A maximum of 7 candidates are admitted each year, which allows for frequent one-on-one student-professor interactions, good studio time, and working space even during these challenging times. 7 years ago, the Stonecroft Foundation for the Arts made a generous gift to the Department of Visual Arts, as they have been impressed with the effect that our MFA program was having in Ottawa community and beyond, and they wanted to encourage us further by financing 2 very important projects for the department. So together, the Stonecroft Foundation and the department created a scholarship to allow one MFA student to take a course at the Venice Biennale that I teach with Jonathan Shaughnessy, an adjunct professor at our department and associate curator of contemporary art at the National Gallery of Canada. This collaboration with the gallery allows for the student to do an internship in Canada Pavilion at the Venice Biennale during the events of the opening week, working directly with the staff of the gallery and interacting with the international art world. The other project, funded through the generous contribution of the Stonecroft Foundation, and thanks to the incredible collaboration of the gallery, 2 institutions with whom the department is proud to partner, is the reason we're gathered here tonight. The annual Stonecroft Visiting Artist Lecture Series, in support of contemporary art discourse, allows the public to learn from prominent Canadian artists themselves about their practices. So this evening, for the 6th edition of the Stonecroft Lecture Series, we're delighted that Ken Lum has accepted our invitation to give an artist talk, which will be followed by a conversation and question period moderated by Josée Drouin-Brisebois, the Senior Curator of Contemporary Art at the National Gallery of Canada. During the evening, please use the Q&A box to type in your questions. Now, to introduce Ken. Ken Lum is an artist best known for his conceptual and representational art, working in different media, including painting, sculpture, and photography. His art deals with how meanings are assigned to images, texts, and objects based on cultural, racial, and social codes. A longtime professor, he currently is the chair of fine arts at the University of Pennsylvania's Weizmann School of Design in Philadelphia. He has published extensively, including a book of his collected writings issued by Concordia University Press in 2020. He has given keynote speeches for the Sydney Biennial, World Museums Conference in Shanghai, and the Universities Art Association of Canada. He has an extensive art exhibition record that includes Documenta 11, the Venice Biennale, Sao Paulo Biennial, Shanghai Biennale, Carnegie Triennial, Sydney Biennale, Liverpool Biennial, Gwangju Biennale, and the Whitney Biennial. Solo exhibitions include the CCA Wattis Institute for Contemporary Arts in San Francisco, Kunstmuseum Luzern in Switzerland, Witte Center for Contemporary Art in Rotterdam, and the Vancouver Art Gallery. Since the mid-1990s, Lum has worked on numerous major permanent public art commissions, including for the cities of Vienna, the Engadins in Switzerland, Rotterdam, St. Louis, Leiden, Utrecht, Toronto, and Vancouver. Lum was project manager for seminal exhibition, The Short Century, Independence and Liberation Movements in Africa, 1945 to 1994. He has also worked as a curator for several large-scale exhibitions, including Shanghai Modern, 1919 to 1945, Sharjah Biennial 7, and Monument Lab, Creative Speculations for Philadelphia. He is co-founder and chief curatorial advisor for Monument Lab. He is represented by Magenta Plains Gallery in New York, Royal Projects in Los Angeles, Gallery Nagel Draxler in Berlin, and Misashin Gallery in Tokyo. Before we welcome Ken on the screen, I would like to thank the Stonecroft Foundation for the Arts for their generosity and trust, the National Gallery of Canada for their collaboration, and Ken Lum for accepting this invitation, and the University of Ottawa MFA student Pete Cahoot for his help in organizing this event. Enjoy the lecture. Merci.
Hello, everybody. I'm still, I've been teaching online mostly, just occasionally showing up at the University of Pennsylvania, where I'm the chair, and but most of the time online, and I'm still not used to it. It's I really miss the face-to-face presence of, particularly of students, and I know there are quite a few here. I'm pleased to, I want to thank everybody for associated with Stonecroft Foundation, the National Gallery of Canada, and the University of Ottawa as well. I think some of you may know that my first teaching experience was as an adjunct professor, or sessional, I guess they say in Canada, at the University of Ottawa, a long time ago. And there were two students in that class. One was Melly Shum, who became an icon in my work, and the other was David Hart, who's quite a well-known Canadian artist, who's also a faculty member in the department I lead in Philadelphia. So I'm pleased to start by just doing an artist talk and then theorizing that, as opposed to offering a paper and so on, because I'm to be honest, I'm a little bit fatigued of writing papers, but I think it's also more apt given the context of students. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. And so what I'm going to do is, I've never done it in this fashion before. I'm going to speak about each genre of work. That they don't, in chronological order according to each genre, as opposed to when they were actually realized. What I tend to do is I work in several channels or streams of work, and then I will jump from a furniture sculpture work to a language painting work and then back to a furniture sculpture work. But I thought it might be interesting just to see all at once furniture sculpture work, or good many of them, and so on. So I want to start by saying something about my background. I came from a background that doesn't lend itself to becoming an artist. My mother worked in a sweatshop, and my father's a bit troubled. I'll leave it at that. And it was very trying. And I didn't speak English, a word of English, until I entered into my first day in grade 1. And imagine how traumatic that was at that time. And so I realized very early on two things. One was that I said that I saw the world literally kind of between rulers and the world, and I understood that my family, my context, myself included, was part of the ruled as opposed to part of the rulers. And the rulers, and even at the age of 6 or even earlier, I knew this, I sensed this, because I lived in a multi-ethnic enclave, maybe about, at that time, 40% Chinese, and then another 15% or maybe even more First Nations, and then another 30 or 40%, Italians, Greeks, African Canadians, and from Hogan's Alley and so on. So I lived right next to Chinatown, and it was like muskoxen that were pointed out. The world was kind of threatening, and we were always struggling, and so on. And that that was very important in terms of my own formation, my own later thinking about art. When I became introduced to art, I always liked doing art in the sense of I always had the ability to draw, and I liked drawing and so on, but I never trained in it, and I never really followed a course on it. It was just not an option for me given my background. And I think that's one of the things that is largely unspoken even today in terms of the art world. Who gets to become an artist is actually a question of privilege to a great degree. And so when I became interested in art, late in my third year of undergraduate, I was kind of immediately fascinated by what passed as contemporary art. because up until that point, I really thought art was about how well you drew a figure, how well you drew a horse, and so on. And I just couldn't quite reconcile how I had these new colleagues in my undergraduate art class that had aspirations of being being artists, and yet had no technical ability to render or draw. And so it was a kind of a shocking system, but at some point I realized that there was something deeper about art, and it didn't make sense, my then I would say conservative view of art. And so this is like one of the very first pieces I did as an undergraduate student. It was called Sculpture for Public Lounge, Living Room Public Lounge. It was done in 1978. And I rented out, no, I didn't rent out. I borrowed Ian Wallace, another noted Vancouver artist, his studio to make this piece. And basically I just rented out furniture. And it took me a few months to even realize this piece because I didn't have any money. I was working in several part-time jobs, and including a burger flipping place. And I saved up enough money just to rent this furniture, put it together as a sculpture, and I showed it. The response was negligible, I would say. Most people were largely befuddled by it, unlike today, where nowadays museums will ask me, can you do a furniture piece? We love it, and so on. But at that time, people didn't really quite know what to make of it. But what I was really interested in was you see, at the time I was learning about particularly American and European avant-garde art, minimal art and such. And I was really interested in this kind of duality of particularly minimal sculpture regarding a depletion, a kind of erasure of the kind of social referencing of the work, because all works, signify some degree of social referencing through the materials and so on. But as you may know, minimal art really made it into a high art, this kind of discourse of phenomenology without any tangible relationship to the social environment and such. So I was kind of interested in, and of course, minimal art was also designed such a way that it configured its form to the dimensions of the space in which it was exhibited. But I was also, so it was a very spatial work, right? And they talked about the kind of presence of minimal art. And of course, the presence of minimal art was nothing but, for me, I recognize that as the alienation problem, the problem of estrangement from the objects that machines have fashioned and that we surround ourselves with as implements of our daily lives. We've lost the kind of connection to the kind of hand. We've lost the connection due to mass production and so on. So there's a kind of melancholic, tragic element to this work. Plus, I was also interested in how a work can situate itself in multiple spaces. If you know the work of Robert Smithson, right, the non-site was premised on the idea of the original. The non-site was the original spaces in which it is called up as the work is cited within the exhibition space and so on. And so here the space of the exhibition space is called up, the space potentially of the collector who buys the works, living room or wherever they put it is called up. And also I was interested in the configuration of private corporate space as well. So there's multiple spaces that I'm interested in, and that forms a kind of thread throughout my work. And the work became much more elaborate and so on. And when I did this piece, I sometimes tell this anecdote because I think it's important. When I showed this, I won't say where because it may reveal the curator. When I showed this once, this image in a talk, I mentioned how I picked this furniture because my mother would have loved this furniture, and this furniture would have been way beyond our station. Let's put it that way, right? And I kind of mentioned that, and of course that solicited some giggles in the audience. I don't know why, but it did. And then later on at dinner, there was a very noted curator looking at me at the dinner table, and he looked over at me and he just said, you know, I don't believe you. And I said, you don't believe me what? I don't believe you when you say that your mother would have loved this furniture. And I said, why not? And he said to me, it's clearly ugly, right? I say that story because not to shock, but I say that story as another kind of unspoken rule in terms of the art system, which is maybe it's mitigated somewhat today, but at that time I really found it obviously offensive, but it was also shocking because this person who is highly regarded curator in the art system could not imagine variations of taste due to social class and so on. And so here's another one, and they were fun for me to do because I could, mimic after minimalist strategies and such. And these couches would be, it's called line, and couches would be equally spaced apart from wall to the first couch and same distance between each subsequent couch and so on. Here's another variation. So I was doing a lot of quotations because I was still learning about art. Partially buried sofa, which pays reference to Robert Smithson, partially buried woodshed and such, and who's a big influence on me. I was very influenced by, Rossler, Graham, Asher, Buren, Wiener, a lot of Valley Explorer, even Gina Pane. A lot of these kind of conceptual artists. I was very Adrian Piper. I was very interested in at that time, and in Vancouver, it was then called the Vancouver School of Art. There was a lot of in Ian Wallace's contemporary art now class. He brought in a lot of noted artists from Europe and America, and they were all generally conceptually based, and that had an enormous influence on me. And so in this piece here, basically, I don't actually make it or especially order it. It's the only thing I think in this case was I asked that it be reupholstered in a very bright orange, and there are 4 sections, right? But obviously the 4 sections are only meant to be 2 sections at most, not 4 sections, 2 horizontal sections that run down the length. And then I placed them together. This was done at the Venice Biennale. It's called Ship of Fools, which is actually a reference to Foucault, where his essay on Ship of Fools. It was called Madness and what was the book? I can't remember right now, but it was about madness and about how the people who were mad, as in insane, were treated with some privileged status, and they would be sent off on a boat from town to town, and each village that in which they arrived at, docked at, they would be celebrated. So I was kind of interested in kind of multiple reference of that, and of course referencing tourism and so on during the time of the Venice Biennale. And as I said at the beginning, after the sofa piece, I would do this piece as opposed to the subsequent furniture pieces. I just thought maybe it might be interesting to delineate each genre in the various iterations for change. And so as I said, I was interested in avant-garde art of I was just learning about. Again, this is also a student work, undergraduate student work. And what I was doing here was collapsing the most conventional way to depict a person through, studio photography and so on, with this kind of generic background and, all these codified laws in terms of presentation and so on, right? And you see this in schools and in classrooms and so on. So, or real estate, cards that real estate agents would have. It's the same system of photography, and they would be collapsed with some logo, right? And this is the Channel 4 logo for WNBC in New York, which actually has some kind of residue of an early Frank Stella stripe painting. And so I was doing these kinds of collisions between the two because, of course, there is a relationship between the two, right? We do live in that social economy of logo types that is important regarding branding in a capitalist society, right? But the initial reception for these works were that they were too brutal, and some people even read it as that I was making some sort of apologia of capitalism. I was making some sort of defense of capitalism, which I certainly was not, or that as opposed to making works that were, I'm not sure, salutary of and mitigating of the harshness of the society we live in. I kind of presented it in the most kind of stark relationship. And that's what I tend to do. I'm very interested in that starkness. In fact, I had a curator also come up to me and say, well, you know, your work doesn't look very Canadian, and so on. And I said, well, why not? He goes, well, Canadian art always has a redemptive component, has a redemptive ambition. I said, well, I'm not that type of artist, right? But I always thought that my work came out of my background in a working class family of a, my immigrant mother, and and I always had to work. My mother always had to work. So it's in that kind of harsh environment, not the environment that you may see in terms of tourist brochures, but the real environment that a lot of Canadians grew up in. So this is called Untitled Ed. And the blue section is just, it doesn't matter, but it's a corporation called Demco, right? And I tried to find a logo that would have one straight side to it so that I could join the photograph. These works here, I hired out a photographer to take because I thought at the time it was more conceptually true. I felt a need to oblige the kind of conceptual rules of fidelity that I'm calling up. And I didn't think I could do it convincingly. Neither did I have that kind of fake library backgrounds and so on of a ready-made studio to take the pictures. And so this work would be, I guess it's about they weren't very big. I would say it's about 4.5 feet tall. And the blue section you see there is plexiglass, and it extends, I'll just extend my cursor here, extends all the way here, and then the photograph itself is just simply laminated on top of an extended plexiglass frame. And this work here is called Untitled Zainab, who was a Governor General's Award winner this year. And the work's got, I started to shift because I wasn't satisfied with the starkness, I guess, of those works. And I was kind of interested in creating greater equilibrium between the picture half, the depicted half, and the name half or the logo type half. And so I started to create specialized logos for friends of mine or associates I ran into and so on. And so I didn't really know, I knew Mr. Jansen a little bit, and I knew he had a big family. And so I coaxed him into having a picture taken. And so I designed a logo for his family. So of course, it's akin to a heraldic shield. It's not, and you see this all the time with namesake branding anyways, like Dell Computer is after Michael Dell, Getty Oil is JP Getty, and so on. So there's lots of names of companies, Charles Schwab and so on are actually named after our natural family and so on, these logos. Amrita and Mrs. Sandhi. And here, I'm also interested in, the laws of society. I've mentioned laws a couple of times, but laws of society. And of course, we also still live very much under the law of patriarchy, the law of the father, the law of the name of the father, right? And so Sandhi is really the father's name, the father's family name, not the mother's family name, certainly not the daughter's family name. They assume Sandhi as their own family name. And so in a sense, Mr. Sandhi is represented here in the green and yellow. And the family is actually complete. And then you have Steve. The odd thing about giving a talk on Zoom is that there's no reaction. So it's a owner family. So these would be all specially designed for the family. And they're not corporations or anything like that. And again, just to point out, the law of the father, owners is obviously the father's name. Her last name is a Chinese name, was Wang, and Wang, of course, would be also her father's name. Cecil and Ethel Grote. And then I decided, well, I can't keep hiring Boone Huey to take my pictures. Since I didn't think, I thought at some point it was too limiting. He did terrifically for me, but at some point I needed to branch out, and so I started learning how to take my own pictures initially with a Hasselblad camera, medium format, and then later on with a larger 4x5 camera, generally a Sinar camera, or a larger medium format camera like a Mamiya RZ67 camera, and so on. So it is a kind of saying adieu to Boone Huey. I asked him whether I could take his picture in the style of he would take my picture, right? So this is Boone Huey photography, and I think this is in the National Gallery of Canada. I was very interested, as you may tell, in depicting right from the start a very multi-ethnic, multi-racial population, which I was interested in. That was the way I grew up, and so obviously what is great about countries like Canada, it's very heterogeneous in terms of its population. And yet at that time when I was doing that, there were actually I would receive comments saying, well, why are you doing that? They thought, some people actually read it as didactic, when I didn't have any such intention. I just saw it as, that's the reality. I wasn't trying to say, isn't it great? Of course I do think it's great, but I wasn't trying to make a point of underlining multiculturalism, multi-ethnicity as something that was, wonderful just to make that point. I was doing it because that was my experience. That was my lived experience in terms of Canadian society. And so it was odd to me to occasionally get that comment that I was trying to make some didactic point about the merits of multiculturalism. Jillian and Smokey. And then you can sort of see that I was, the graphic side, I was really developing an interest in. I do think that, graphic and fonts and so on, especially now with all the social media and the internet, still remains so deeply, deeply under theorized. The kind of pictorialism of text, and so on, and the kind of textuality of pictures. I was really interested in that kind of involution, one to the other. This is premised on at that time, I was told that this was the premised on the #1 best-selling postcard in Canada. Not particularly this picture I took, but one of a group of First Nations in a feathered headdress standing in front of a stagecoach caravan, flanked by 2 red serge Mounties, and with the Canadian Rockies in the background. And that was the #1 selling tourist postcard. And so when I noticed this postcard, I went, well, it presented as a kind of Native people as a kind of museum existence, right? Maybe even dormant or or of the past. And so I wanted to kind of represent it, but as you know, in the here and now. I'm very interested in the entire panoply, you know, almost like an August Sander archive, the panoply of peoples, without moralizing, without saying this pity me or and so on. And I think that was a bit shocking at the time for Canadians. Like I somehow had to show my cards of sympathy and so on, which I wasn't so interested in doing. Alex Gonzalez loves his mother and father, right? And I was very interested in. I remember going to a museum in Europe, and because I never went to Europe until I was 29 years old. And so finally, when I got a chance to go to a museum, I remember seeing a painting, you know, there's a bean eater, someone's just eating a bean soup, and then all these kinds of topics that were everyday, quotidian, and you know, la vie de tous les jours subjects. And so I thought, wow, okay. And when I ran into a German friend on that same trip, who his parents I know also quite well, I said, "How are your parents?" And Daniel, and he said, you know, his English was not absolutely fluent, but it's good. And he said, "Oh, my mother and father, I love my mother and father," right? So, and I thought, at least the way I took it was because of his lack of fluency in English that he kind of blurted it out that way, right? And which was truer in terms of his sentiments, right? That this kind of public avowal of his affections for his parents came out because, you know, almost carefreely because of his insufficiency of English. And so I thought that could make an interesting work. And Melly Shum hates her job, which now has a museum named after her in Rotterdam, which we'll get into later on. By the way, when I was teaching, I think I mentioned this at the beginning, when I was teaching as a sessional instructor in my first teaching class, and I was god awful as a teacher at that time, by the way, and so I feel sorry for these students. And so, you know, Melly Shum was a student of mine, and so it's great. You know, there's an article about her that just came out recently about where's Melly Shum today, and it was published in Holland. So she was a University of Ottawa art student. Bindi Sanji, Employee of the Month. Tracy Bond meets Pepe Pig. And, you know, I have anecdotes for all these works. You know, this one comes out of my having a coffee at some West End, Vancouver coffee shop, which is located next door to an A&W hamburger franchise. And the A&W Root Bear wallows down the street handing out coupons, I guess, you know, free root beer or hamburger or fries or whatever. And then as the Root Bear approached right in front of where I was sitting, this little girl with golden locks, like a Goldilocks, ran out, grabbed the A&W Root Bear by the leg and looked up at it and said, "I love you, A&W Root Bear." Right, and I'm sitting there, I'm going, wow, okay, this is a piece, you know. And I was really interested in the problem of the Root Bear, you know, the bear as a character and character of nature, as a figure of nature, usurping the enchantment of the child for the selling of hamburgers. And so in this case, it's Pepe's Pizza. A woodcutter and his wife. This is a super popular piece. I wish I'd made 10 of them, but this is the first line comes from A Woodcutter's Wife is, "Into the dark forest there lived a woodcutter and his wife." That's the opening line of Hansel and Gretel, right? About an enchanted woodcutter and his wife. Goes out with a tiny axe and chops down a part of a branch of a tree maybe a sapling, and that's enough wood to keep the fire in the hearth going for a few days, right? This is a different story. This is a story of disenchantment with nature and the economy that's premised on the destruction of nature. So this is a work that comes out of my meditation of living in British Columbia at the time. And I encourage students when they make work to always, you know, I often will encounter students say, I'm not sure what to say, what's a good subject. And I always say, well, I don't understand that, because there's always something interesting in terms of your world, your background, right? There are all these kind of dissonant points that you can draw from to make interesting art. It's somehow for too many students, their own background is considered too banal or off limits to generating art, when it's not true. Garbage pickers. We Are Sacred Blade. The world's worst band. Nice guys, but terrible band. By the way, the guitars aren't plugged in. My name is Scott Rizicki. The kid is, you know, being tabbed by the police, and that's what, you know, you have your identity. You have you, and then you also have your identity. That is your administrative identity, your birth name. But that's not you, right? That's only partly you. Rebecca Rosenberg sings Bye Bye Blackbird, and she's really belting it out. It actually comes out of where I had a studio nearby, and I'd hear this guy sing Bye Bye Blackbird every day for years in Vancouver. And he would scroll up a piece of newspaper and just sing into it like it was a real microphone. So a lot of the works come out of daily observations. And then the works, you know, the image text became even more equal, you might say, right? And I was really interested in the kind of mantric qualities of text that doesn't repeat identically, but that they are variations one after the other. And that mantric quality, which is, you know, erratic as well, it creates sound in someone's head as they're reading it, creates a kind of circulation, kind of oscillation between image side and text side, and so on, that you can apprehend very quickly the text, because you can see there's only a limited number of words. But I was really interested in referencing these moments where language is at its limits. Language cannot adequately encapsulate what the feelings or the emotional stress or the trauma that's being experienced for that moment. I can't believe I'm in Paris. I can't believe I'm in Paris. So, you know, so she's not rich. She's a working class woman. You may not be able to see it here, but she's got a huge leg scar right here where my cursor is. And the story is really about her impending demise. She may live another 15 years or 20 years, right? But the idea is that she's worked hard, and now she's saved up finally, and her lifelong dream is to visit Paris, and she finally has visited Paris. So the story is really about mortality as well. And that's a kind of sub-theme in my work. I deal a lot with mortality and death. God, I miss you. I like myself the way I am. Again, the kind of mantric quality. There's no reason to change. I like myself the way I am. There's no reason to change. And these works are quite large, done on aluminum frames, over 6 feet or about 2 meters, not just under 2 meters tall. Very heavy. Onions, eggs, milk, butter, newspaper. It's about responsibility. I don't need a list, I remember it. Hey, that's not funny, that's not funny. Je suis française, je suis américain, je suis anglaise, je suis canadien. Right? Again, I think this is like, you know, I can't believe I'm in Paris. You know, she's une femme au troisième âge, comme on dit en français, right? So she's learning French at a very advanced age. But as she's saying, je suis, at the moment of saying it, she's also thinking, who am I? Qui suis-je? Right? So she pauses. It becomes like an ontological reflection. Don't be silly, you're not ugly. You're not ugly, you're not ugly at all. You're being silly, you're just being silly. You're not ugly at all. And it doesn't matter what the brunette says to the Asian woman, she will never be persuaded that she's not ugly. Hello, how are you? I'm fine, my name is Feng. Again, identity, trying to learn, right? Of course, he's Feng, but he's also Feng as in F-U-N-G. He's also Feng in the Chinese writing of the word. So he's not just, right? But because he lives in an English society, he needs to learn how to address and pronounce his identity as F-U-N-G. You don't love me, you've never loved me. When have you ever loved me? When have you ever given a shit about me? Right? Again, the more she repeats variations of this line, the more it's lost. The one person that she wants back will never come back. And these are all stage pictures, by the way. And then I did these kind of mirror works. I'm going to try to speed through here, which, you know, how people insert pictures into the edge of mirrored frames. These are permanently inserted, and they're never inserted at an angle. They're always inserted upright and perpendicular, because they had to look formally strong. And the collection of pictures can come from multiple sources. It doesn't have to be identified with one person. But as soon as you put them into one frame, something happens, which is that you start reading it as a narrative of a possible subjectivity, as being owned by one person, of telling this or relaying the story of one person or one household or one family. And then the gallery would be like this. I was interested in photography, but I wasn't interested in taking any pictures. And so I used, you know, I collected up these pictures, and they came in two sizes, portrait size and full figure size. And of course, in the act of identifying with these pictures from someone else along the margins of these works, you see other people also engaged in the same act. You also see yourself reflected in the act of looking. Should I talk? I think I'll skip this. So this is the work I did in, it was one of early public art piece for Leiden, and it's for the Museum of Ethnology, which is a kind of anthropological museum, which is an enterprise which is obviously not untroubled because it was tied to colonial legacies, imperial conquest, and rapacity, right? The stealing of things and objects for collections in Western museums and so on. So I was invited to do something on the outside of this building, and in Leiden. By the way, this is also the first anthropological museum in the world in the kind of modern sense. And so I said, well, can I do something in the library, which they didn't call the library anymore, they called it the information room. And the information room has a lot of comfortable chairs and only 3 walls. So that means when you come in and you can see the information room almost like a neoclassical set, where you see the 2 walls and then the back wall. And I said, well, why doesn't it have a 4th wall? Because, you know, it makes it slightly noisy with people coming in off the foyer. And they said, because it's to show symbolically that we recognize the problematic status of the Ethnological Museum, and that we have nothing to hide, and so on. And so I made this piece premised on the 3 Chinese monkeys see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, but tied to the phrenological comparative comparisons of profiles. That was all the rage during the moment of founding of the Ethnological Museum in Leiden. So here's Speak No Evil, and that's the European profile. This is the African profile. See how it's exaggerated with the axial line of the profile jutting out, right? See no evil, and then having some proximity to the axial line of the profile of the ape, hear no evil. So that's, and these are about 10 feet square. It doesn't, maybe not, doesn't look it, but it's 8.5 by 8.5 to 10 feet square. And I did this work, and I started doing these kind of mirror installations. This work is was in the Istanbul Biennale. And you walk down this corridor, right? And you see this long mirror. And on the opposite side is a text by the great Sufi poet, Yunus Emre, who wrote in Arabic. And it's a beautiful poem about embodiment. And it's also what he called realization. And it also references the three great religions. Of course, Turkey being at Asia Minor is also at the intersection of three great religions, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, and so on. And so you see this woman here in the light blue top, and she's walking down the course of this very long corridor in order to be able to read the text properly, because this text on her right, on your left side, is printed backwards. And so the only way you can actually properly read it, because it's so long and so many heads are interfering, is to walk down this corridor. And once you walk towards the end of the corridor, here you can see it's in English as well. You can see it's very readable here. You walk down to the end here where my cursor is, and then you do a 90-degree turn. You go down a corridor, short one, then you go down another corridor to about here. And then you enter into an opening. And when you go, when you enter into that opening, you realize that this is actually a two-way glass, and not a true mirror, but a two-way glass, and with one side highly reflective, right? And you can see the lamps here. I had a lot of lights here because you need it to be as reflective as possible. If you have a lot of luminosity, you create that kind of reflection. And so what happens is it's about this relationship between being seen and not being aware of it, and so on. But it is also quite democratic in the sense that everyone who walks down this corridor eventually discovers the joke, you might say, the pun, right, of being seen. And it was a very popular piece. It's called The House of Realization. Oops. Oh, I only got 1 minute left. Okay. Maybe I should speed through this. Sorry for running so long. I did this in Documenta. I'll just end in about 3 minutes. I did this in Documenta, and it's called Mirror Maze with 12 Signs of Depression. And I'm interested in these questions, right? You walk in and all you see is these lines of depression and so on. So I'm really interested in these kinds of things about subject formation and imagining the subjectivity of others. I was going to show you some of my new work, but I'm going to skip that. So I did shopkeeper signs. I didn't time myself very well. Again, death, closed today in memory of Shirley Janet. Sure, it's just a made up name. It doesn't really exist. I won't talk about that. And then maybe I'll just end with these works because I'm really proud of these works. These are what I call necrology works, and they're all text, but they are all composed in a 19th century fashion of frontispiece language, which is lost. And I try to mimic this kind of 18th and 19th century language, which didn't oblige in the contemporary sense of rules of design. All right. And so I'll just read this and then one more and then I'll stop. Life as a key punch operator, or the exciting escapades of Charlotte Wilson Turner, the 7th of 10 children of George and Harriet Wilson, who upon graduating from Camden High School became a first-rate clerk typist for the Veterans Administration, comprising anecdotes of Willie Turner, the police officer husband to whom she was married 62 years, with her death falling exactly the 1-year anniversary of her husband's death, giving a full account of all their lark sprees, rows, rambles, and other frolics, including saving up and going on a Caribbean cruise, being a faithful portraiture of her joy in her daughters Josephine and Lucy, and her love of sewing, with particular observations of her attending the Camden School of Office training to further herself as a key punch operator until her health failed, forcing retirement, but remaining active as an usher in the Antioch Camden Baptist Church. So these are very kind of like everyday lives. I was kind of interested in kind of heroizing through this kind of elaborate text. And I'll just read one more. I'll read this one and end it because it's the most unfortunate case, and these would be very large, they're like around 2.6 meters tall, larger in fact, 2.8 meters tall. The most unfortunate case of Lucy Chono Santos, convicted of smuggling heroin into Indonesia, whose mistake was to fall victim to a phony employment recruiter who fronted for an international drug gang and later threatened to kill Lucy's family if she refused to do as the gang demanded. Follow her story from growing up in a shanty on the edge of Manila, where she supported her parents and siblings by retrieving value from garbage, to bearing a child at a tender age, of whom she was separated for several years, as she sat on death row awaiting execution by firing squad, passing her days in a squalid and overcrowded prison. To this is offered the particularities of her finality, including the many press stories, legal and diplomatic documents, and the many affecting and heartrending letters to her son written a short time prior to her demise, all pressed from the originals of her own handwriting. So I'll end it with that there, because I think that gives you a good picture in terms of the variety of work and my obsessions with life, death, and subject formation and so on. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Ken. That was fantastic. I learned a lot. That was good. I thought I knew, but I learned a lot. I just wanted to introduce myself. So I'm Josée Drouin-Brisebois, the Senior Curator of Contemporary Art at the National Gallery. Merci à tout le monde d'être ici ce soir. So I wanted to also take this opportunity to invite our audience members to write questions for Ken in the Q&A section of Zoom. Q&R is actually how it shows up in French for me. C'est questions et réponses. And what we can talk about for maybe about 15 minutes, Ken, and see if people have questions, is really around monuments and public art. And specifically, I wanted to hear you talk about Monument Lab, this amazing project that you were involved with in Philadelphia. That was really focused on ways that publicly cited art, memorials, and monuments operate. Mm-hmm. And my question really is, what did you learn and take away from this project?
Well, I'm still learning, so it's not like the process has ended. But I could tell you that when I first moved to Philadelphia in 2012 to assume my position at University of Pennsylvania, one of the first things I noticed about that city, because it's a relatively old city for North America, at least a formalized terms, and I noticed that the kind of disequilibrium in terms of the monumental inventory of the city. City has over 1,000 statues, right? And yet the first full-figured, officially sanctioned statue of an African American did not come about until 2017, right? And Philadelphia has a proud and also horrible history in terms of that question. Proud in the sense that it was a entry point for the Underground Railway. Not so proud because there were also a lot of lynchings and such that took place. And a great history of, W.E.B. Du Bois was from there, and also a lot of great jazz musicians. Duke Ellington, played there regularly, and so on. And yet there was, so that disequilibrium I found kind of fascinating. I met up with someone teaching in urban studies, and we were commenting about this. And I always had this idea to have a negative history festival, right? Mm-hmm. A festival that talks about that would be citywide, but that actually talks about the kind of truth, the sagacious, knowledge that people in their lived experience can impart. And so Monument Lab came as a result of that in 2012. And then we decided to do an exhibition about it, it was comprised of two parts. One was, slightly more conventional, like a Biennale type, where you commission artists to do something. But then the other part was the radical part, which was that we would do it we would extend it as a democratic project to ask people of Philadelphia what they wanted for a monument, right? And it just evolved. Like now I'm very interested. I do a lot of talks on the iconography of all kinds of monuments which are very banal and that we don't really question, right? For quite a number of years, I was doing one on, I cited, slave ownership and so on, including James McGill in Montreal and so on. And so some people said, wow, you were so ahead of the game, so to speak. And I never thought that at all. I thought it was something that was known for a long time. It was the only difference was that I worked at formalizing an entity around that question of monuments. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, what I was really impressed by was really the level of engagement and involvement of the public. The fact that you had this kind of opportunity for people to submit, and I was curious, what are the next steps for the city of Philadelphia with this project?
Well, I mean, I can tell you that when we collected up all the thoughts of Philadelphians regarding what should be remembered and so on, right? Quite a few people actually cited, there should be a monument to better schools, because schools are a disaster in America, as most Canadians probably know. Unless you have money, then it's fine, right? And so on. So, and some said we need a monument to garbage collection, right? Because it's a very poor, it's still the largest poor city in America. We need, and then about 3%, a minority of the people said we need a monument to remember the MOVE bombing of 1985, right? And, but that was a significant percentage. What that meant was, and the city has never acknowledged it, never even addressed, let alone atoned for that upheaval that was wreaked on its own citizens, which resulted in many deaths, by the way.
And that was the civil rights.
It was a kind of a cult. There was a cult called the John Africa and his family, and they were a cult. And they were advocating. It sounds crazy now, but they were vegans. They believed in sustainability. They were, they ate tofu and all that kind of stuff. But they were seen as weird, and they refused to have their children schooled in public school. They felt they may have been coined the term deschooling. They were the ones that said, we can school our children better, and maybe they could, but it was intolerable to the city at the time. And so what that meant was that even though the city has not acknowledged, it's the trespasses it committed on the city on its own citizens, Philadelphians have long memories. They remember it. Just like I'm sure if you did that for the people of Ottawa, all kinds of local knowledges, which I think we ignore or underestimate at our peril.
Mm-hmm. And I know, over the years, how involved you've been with public art. And did Monument Lab change the way you think or your approach to public art? And I'm thinking specifically about like your experience in Philadelphia and a place like Vancouver, how different is that for you, having gone from one place to the other?
Well, I've written several points in my book that I've never felt at home, no matter where I am. I didn't. Even though growing up I'm more at home in the sense that in Vancouver because I'm familiar with things, but deep down, I wasn't any more at home than I am at Philadelphia. In a funny way, because I know Philadelphia is not where my formation was. I feel more at home in an odd way. I would say that when I moved to Philadelphia, of course, the terms are different. It's much more complex. It's America after all, and it's much more subject to comparative racism and those types of things. But but I think all my work somehow was open to those questions, open to those problems, even from Vancouver. And so when I moved to Philadelphia, I felt many of the things I was interested in was actually affirmed.
Mm. And so what are some of your thoughts about monuments in Canada?
Well, it's not just monuments, it's also names and so on, right? I mean, I come from a province, I mean, it's got a doubly colonial name, British Columbia. I think it's a god-awful name, and so on. I think there's a lot of work to be done. I think Canadians tend to be a little bit too self-satisfied and smug about those questions, right? Like I grew up where all my schools was Lord Selkirk, Prime Minister Gladstone, Admiral Seymour. Admiral Seymour was one of the key persons prosecuting the Opium War off the harbor of Canton, right? And my roots are from Canton, so it's one of those kind of weird things where I went to a school that celebrated this guy that was bombing and killing Chinese during the Opium War, and I'm Chinese, and when I went to school there, it was maybe about 35% Chinese and all Cantonese, right? So I think there's a lot of things that we need to really deal with in Canada. In a funny way, America is both more regressive and more progressive, and that's what makes it very schizophrenic as a place to live, right? The production of knowledge is like much more kind of fecund and rapid. I don't believe that Monument Lab would have been even possible in Canada. I mean, in a very short time, we had this idea. We pitched this idea to different foundations, and next thing you knew, we had like $2.5 million to do a major exhibition.
Amazing.
And just recently, we got $4 million from Mellon, right?
Wow.
Now we're doing projects in Amsterdam, in Amsterdam, in Antwerp, and also Munich. So there's a lot of, and Los Angeles recently, Chicago, Memphis.
Oh, I didn't realize it was expanding beyond the US. That's fantastic. I mean, congratulations on the project. It's I was really, really happy to read the book and to get the book.
Right, but the reason why I'm a chief curatorial advisor is because I'm just in it. It's too much work. The co-founder of Monument Lab, Paul Farber, he's a lot younger than me, and I have a family. He doesn't. I am the chair of a department, at a very alpha university, right? Work at Ivy League universities are super alpha. If you write, like if I wrote a book, right, then the people congratulate you, and then they say, "What's next?" Unbelievable. No, it's true. It's like the work never ends. It's just and everybody's really into it, and I don't think that's entirely healthy or even good. But it's just and it's not good for me because I tend to just take it as a challenge to do more and more work. So
yeah, well, I think rethinking monuments is really important. It's something very much on my mind. Rethinking museums as well. That's for another lecture, I think.
Yeah.
But
we're doing work for the Cleveland Museum of Art. How can we rethink the museum, for example?
Oh, fantastic! Oh, well, we can have a further conversation about that. I'd be very, very curious. But thinking about names and thinking about places, I was really struck by Melly Shum Hates Her Job. That was originally commissioned for outdoors for the former Witte de Wit Center for Contemporary Art in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And that the museum recently announced it's changing its name to the Kunstinstituut Melly. Can you talk about this commission and the public's reaction to the work?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really delicious story, and it really has very little to do with me, right? It was purely fortuitous because I was the inaugural exhibitor at the then called Witte de Wit Center for Contemporary Art in Rotterdam. At that time, the Witte de Wit, which is basically like a Kunstverein, was located in a, let's just say, slightly down and out neighborhood. Nobody went there at night. It was a bit dark and and it wasn't really a pleasant area. And so, of course, nowadays it's totally hipsterville and be totally gentrified. And so they named it Witte de Wit because it was located, the address was 50 Witte de Witstraat. So they named it after the street, right? But Witte de Wit is named after Cornelius Witte de Wit, who was a colonial officer for the Dutch East India Company, which was very much involved in the Indonesian slave trade, right? So a very problematic figure, right? So during this time of social reckoning, there was a process that, to rename the thing. But when I exhibited, they had this old billboard frame because the one end of it was abutting an alleyway, which has now become a public concourse. And they kept this old billboard frame. And then they said, well, we're going to keep this billboard frame. We're going to refurbish it. And we're going to post a poster of the exhibiting artist with all the information, all the talks, the dates of the exhibition, and so on, and with an image of a work, right? And so they said, we'd like to post Melly Sham Hates Her Job. And then we'll lay out the text of your name, the dates of the show, and so on top of it, right? And for whatever reasons, I don't even remember why, but for whatever reasons, I said, can we just have the image of the work without any of that text? They had a discussion and they said, okay, fine. The understanding was that the billboard the poster would come down at the end of my exhibition 3 months later. But what happened
in 1990, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, in 1990, yeah. And what happened was once the work came down, signaling the end of my show, and then a new billboard would go up in concordance with whoever was following me in the next exhibition. The museum received a lot of phone calls and letters even. This is before internet. Letters even about demanding that Melly Sham return to her place, right? And so then a few weeks after I returned to Vancouver, I received a phone call, and I remember it clear as a bell. And they said, we have a proposition, we would like to reinstall it. And I said, why? And what about the next exhibition? They said, we're getting a lot of public demand for it to be put back up. And I said, why? And they said, well, one person in particular said, every city needs a monument to people who hate their jobs. And I went, oh my God. And it's been there since. And since then, it's been, dozens of Flickr pages, and it's on every tourist brochure, right? So you see the official tourist brochure at the City Hall, even, it'll cite all the sites you can see, and there's an arrow, Melly, right? So I didn't have anything to do with that other than just a fortuitous decision to wipe out the rest of the text, explaining my show. But I love it. I love, and people have really taken it in. So I feel very lucky because it's very rare for public art to gain such a kind of embrace publicly.
Yeah, no, I was so happy to hear that announcement and surprised and, very proud as well. So we have a few questions. So the first one was actually sent early, and it's a question by Joel Sector. And he writes, Mr. Lum, I would be interested to hear about your experience at Documenta 11, working with Okwi and Wazor, and the turn of the century shift to post-colonial perspectivism.
Well, I can't, Okwi was like a brilliant person. I met him I was teaching in Paris as a professor at the L'École des Beaux-Arts at the time. And he came into the hallways there, and someone said, oh, you got to meet this guy. It was all in French. You got to meet this guy, Okwi and Wazor. It's really interesting, and so on. He's a really talented poet and stuff. Totally unknown. This is like in the earlier part of the 1990s, or I guess 94, 95, around there. And, and he didn't have any money. He was like, became very dapper dresser, but he didn't have any money. In fact, I had to buy him a coffee and so on. And he gave this talk and how he wanted to do this project and so on. And I thought, wow, I don't know. And at that time, it coincided with because I have these periods of, I don't mind saying it, of quite deep despondency. And I write about that. I've written about that, and that was and that kind of extends to real serious doubts about continuing on as an artist, or rejecting the art system, and all sorts.
I remember your dinners with Rodney Graham. You sharing that with me about those conversations.
Yeah, and so, anyways, it was in that context, and so he came in right at the right time, and I thought, I need to know this guy. I need to follow this guy, because I wouldn't mind. I'm curious about what art and culture and politics in Africa as lived experiences. I'd never been there before, and so as soon after that, I actually I wrote to NKA, Journal of Contemporary African Art, because it was Oakley who told me to connect with them. I said I was interested in writing about the Dakar art, or the Dakar Biennale, and so on, and and then I see Joanne Bertie Dansker was here earlier. Maybe she's still here, and she was like the museum director of Village Stuck in Munich at the time. And I approached her and I said, hey, I met this guy Oakley. He's got this great show and called The Short Century, and needs a venue for it. That's the only thing that's hindering. To make a long story short, she was totally open. It was very rare. It was like, none of this kind of Q&A and testing me and stuff. She just said, let's do it. This sounds like a great show.
Wow. Right.
And so I was lucky in that way. And yeah, he changed my life, right? He changed, I have so many stories to tell. I don't know how to answer it properly. I have so many personal stories to tell about Oakley. He was not an easy guy to be with, by the way. It's not like, but he was just brilliant, and I miss him.
There's actually someone who wrote a question around lived experience, Kai Ma, who wrote, thanks for a wonderful talk. Please elaborate the use of lived experience in your work as subject and as process.
Well, lived experience to me, I'm interested in lived experience as a kind of field of disconnect from, the experience that is planned out, experience that's determined, administratively determined, right, and so on. You can say that, I can say I work at a university, I teach these classes, I do this, and so on. I get a paycheck at the end, and so on. But that's not necessarily the lived experience. The lived experience might be, I might be very unhappy in that job, right? That's the lived experience, right? So lived experience has to do with body. Your consciousness of your body has to deal with processes of embodiment, that you develop a kind of cognizance of how your immersion in the soup of the social shapes your knowledge, shapes your knowledge. There's not a knowledge that comes from your head, it comes from your body. It's biological even, and so on. So I think that's really important. Lived experience, like in Monument Lab, was the lived experience of neighborhoods, of people who gained their wisdom by working every day in some crummy job and then going home, in a dangerous neighborhood perhaps, and then eating fast food because they don't have time to cook for themselves. That's a lived experience.
Maybe one last question, and then I'll thank everybody for coming. Christina Martinez, thanks for a great talk. How do you view appropriation in the context of your practice?
If you mean by appropriation areas which are verboten because someone else has a greater right to quote or reference something, I'm not all that sympathetic to it, right? I think, when I was doing my furniture pieces initially, I got a lot of flack, not a lot, but I got enough flack at the time in the late 70s from women artists saying you're moving into the territory that is really the purview of women, furniture and things like this, and I wasn't interested in who has the right to appropriate, who doesn't have a right to appropriate. Of course, that's not to say that you shouldn't be sensitive to all kinds of questions, because obviously oppressed peoples, subjugated peoples have been seen greater degrees of appropriation than privileged people. Mm-hmm. Privileged people feel that they can appropriate everything, including just steal things outright from, as booty from wars, right? Mm-hmm. So, obviously those types of things, each person has to kind of draw a line that's ethical to them, right? But I think there's a lot of other areas which is in the common terrain of visuality that I don't necessarily accede to as not having the right on my part to appropriate.
Well, I want to thank you very much, Ken. It's been really a pleasure. And
sorry for running over. I didn't realize I ran over something.
It's okay. I tried to keep our conversation, a bit short, but no, it was really, really fantastic. And I want to thank everybody for joining us as well, and to invite people to join us again on November 21st from 1 to 2 to hear the 2020 New Generation Photography Award-winning artists talk to Andrew Cunard, Associate Curator of Photographs at the National Gallery. And I also just want to say how the National Gallery is really happy to collaborate with the University of Ottawa, Department of Visual Arts. Also, where I went to school and where I studied visual arts in my day. And we look forward to seeing everyone again next year, hopefully in person, for the 7th Stonecroft lecture. So thank you again, Ken.
The tragedy is that I feel like having a drink right now with some people. It's
totally.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.